And we're live. Welcome everybody to our Transgender Patient Advocacy panel, brought to you by City of Hope and Pride in the City. And so, in our efforts to pursue equity and excellence in care, we are doing our Transgender Advocacy panel to help improve the affirming environment that our providers and our staff work in to deliver better care. And so I just wanted to give some time to our sort of facilitator, Pride in the City, to just say a few words of Pride in the City at City of Hope. Logan?
Hi, my name is Logan Caldwell, he, him, and I work with the City of Hope Pride in the City Employee Resource Group. Our mission is to create an accepting and inclusive environment that strives to serve the needs and interests of all City of Hope LGBTQIA plus employees, patients, and families, including the surrounding areas. So happy to be a part of this discussion, and I look forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Logan. I totally forgot to introduce myself. My name is Reno Samoa. I'm an endocrinologist at City of Hope, so I'm on faculty and staff here. And this panel is also presented to you from on behalf of Pasifika by Design, which is the media group that is a staunch advocate and ally to LGBTQ communities, but also a strong supporter of Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander efforts and community development. And so it's with their grace that we're able to broadcast the panel widely on their social media outlets. So you can access the live stream on the Facebook site, but you can also the Facebook link. But you can also access the recording later on the YouTube, the Pacifica by Design YouTube channel as well. And so, with no further ado, I'm super, super, super excited for you to hear from our esteemed panelists. They represent a swath of experience of intersectional environments that have lent itself to a unbelievable mountain of resumes in regards to advocacy for a lot of disenfranchised communities. So I'm so tickled pink that you get to hear from them. And so we're going to do some short introductions. And they will get to explain to you a little bit more about kind of what they do, so that you can also reach out to them as a resource for a great many things that they do. So we'll start with Camila.
Hi, everyone. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, whenever you're watching this recording. And for those live, hello. My name is Camila Camilleon. I pronounce her she, her, ella, and I'm the president at the San Gabriel Valley LGBTQ Center and the director of policy at California Latinos for Reproductive Justice. Excited to be in conversation with this amazing panel today.
Thank you, Camila. And then we'll go to Hector.
Gracias. Hello, everyone. Buenas noches. Hector Trinidad Plasencia, pronouns they, them, we, us, Executive Director with Plasencia Consulting and Chair of the Los Angeles County LGBTQ Commission. Our background is in immigrant rights and trans and queer justice, and we're excited to be around a group of experts panel and sharing with you all today. Gracias.
Thanks, Hector. Then we'll go to Tepa.
Sorry, I was trying to unmute. Hello, everyone. My name is Tepa, she, her pronouns. I am proud to serve as the health clinic director for Mapumaya Clinic, which is operated by Utopia Washington in Kent, Washington. We are a free clinic that is led by trans women, but also Pacific Islander women. And I'm very happy to be a part of this conversation.
Thanks, Tepa. And we'll go to Manumalo.
Salofalava, everyone. I'm Munmalo. I go by Malo for short and use he, him, his, Oya pronouns. I'm Fatane, a Samoan transgender man, and I have over 25 years in nonprofit leadership and organizing experience to include 15 years at the American Red Cross Biomedical Services, specializing in quality assurance and compliance and regulatory affairs. I am a former co founding inaugural executive director of Utopia Portland and former board president of two other LGBT led organizations, the Q Center and Pride Northwest. I own the consulting firm Pasifika Impact LLC, and I recently co founded, along with other trans men of Pasifika descent, the nonprofit Pasifika Transgender Men Network. Happy to be here.
Thanks, Malo. And then last but not least, Ama. Ama, you're muted.
Bulavinaka, sorry. Bulavinaka, everyone. My name is Amasai Cheke. She, her pronouns. I'm originally from the beautiful islands of Fiji, and I serve Utopia as our policy program coordinator, overlooking Utopia's policy work. And also, a very young feminist and an activist, and looking forward to this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Amma. So I didn't put a lot of questions in because I wanted to get everyone I wanted to leave a lot of time for us to dive deep into issues. And I wanted to take the most advantage of the unbelievable expertise that this panel has. Um, so we'll start with the first one, and it's open. So feel free to chime in as you feel you want to. So our first question is: has your gender identity ever affected your health care? And if so, how? So I'm gonna read it again. So has your gender identity ever affected your health care? And if so, how has it?
I can go.
Okay.
Um, yeah, so I think for me, from my personal standpoint, I think one experiences is usually for me is misgendering and biases. Some healthcare providers have assumed things about me based on stereotypes, leading to very uncomfortable and dismissive interactions and conversation. Too often, I walk into a healthcare facility not usually mugged up or looking so feminine. And so when they see my identification and who I am, they pursue, assume uh, solely on my appearance. And so sometimes that's usually um, the things that I see that but also from a very policy perspective, we know that transgender patients often encounter barriers, and we know this due to systemic biases and also to the lack of training and discriminatory practices. And I think one thing that I also would like to say that, Dr. Samoa, you like research. And so data, there's always data gaps in terms of, healthcare access for our community. And the healthcare system often fails to really capture gender identity in patient records to correctly, correctly, but also that really impacts the delivery of personalized care for our community. Thank you.
Thanks, Amma. You are not allowed to refer to me as Dr. Samuel for the rest of the discussion. Okay, that goes for everybody on here. Um, Anyone else want to chime in?
Sure, I can go. So the answer is absolutely yes. As a trans woman, as a Fa'afafine, in college when I was much younger, coming from the island of Samoa, where gender affirming care did not exist in the form of hormone replacement therapy for people like myself, moving to Hawaii and finally experiencing that and finally learning about, doctors being able to do that, it was difficult because the doctor that I went to see was just like he had his own clinic, but eventually he passed. And so it was a very low barrier. I walk in and I pay what I needed to pay and I got my hormone shots. But a few years after I moved to Hawaii, he passed. And so I finally started to experience the challenges of like trying to find a doctor that understood me. And so I went to Kaiser, I went to so many different places. Um, and what I realized at the time was that I was never able to sit down with a doctor and talk about anything else about my health until I found a doctor that was also able to provide me with hormones. And so it was important to me. It's like, yes, I knew that I had to, like, I come from Samoa and there are a lot of like issues that are often, prevalent in my community that I needed to be careful around and I needed to learn more about and see how it would affect me. But I think at the time I didn't have capacity to think about that when I didn't even feel affirmed in myself. And so for many years, I neglected like all of the other parts of my overall health until I actually found a doctor that was able to provide me with gender affirming care. And like I am fortunate today to be able to have that. And I also see the effects, the positive effects that it has on my life. I now have a doctor here in Washington State. Her name is Dr. Tuila Oifue, a fellow Samoan woman that helps me with not just my gender affirming care, but like everything else, like having that understanding of being another Samoan woman as well, understanding cultural structural barriers that may play an impact on my health, but also like it now I can actually like start looking at other things like how's my A1C level, how's my blood pressure, and it's like because I have the luxury now to be able to look at all of those other parts of me because I feel happier with who I am.
Thanks, Depa.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Uh, Thank you for the opportunity, Dr. Samuel, Ray, and esteemed panelists. Um, yes, my gender identity has impacted my healthcare tremendously. There has not been any conclusive studies on long-term impact of testosterone therapy treatment for transgender men. So that unknown important factor always is in the back of my mind when my primary care physician is determining the success rate of a treatment plan that I could receive mentally, physically, and medically to transition from being a female assigned at birth to a transgender man comes with a twisty and windy road that has some bumps, but also has some nice stretches of unobstructed pathways. I'm really fortunate to live in a state like California that has trans affirming legislation and to receive gender affirming care. I am blessed that I have a great rapport with a primary care physician and medical support team, and I'm able to have a good interaction with them to advocate for my medical needs and concerns.
Again, you're too nice. I'll go first. Hi, everybody. I really like this question, and I think for myself, I'll speak from my perspective in my 20s. Definitely, my gender identity has been affected by my healthcare and vice versa. I started medically transitioning at the beginning of the pandemic, so in 2020, and I think in many reasons it was because we were at home. And we had the ability to really like connect with ourselves, really ask ourselves these deep questions, and really think about what was next for my journey. And so I actually began hormones on the last day of my 25th year. So as you know, in California and across the states, when you turn 26, you get off of your parents' insurance. And so for myself, Kaiser has a really great program where if you start medically transitioning earlier than 26, then Kaiser doesn't take you off of their healthcare because they like to stay a part of your transition care team. So I'm 30 years old now. I still have Kaiser, and that team has been with me for the last 4 years. And but I will say that in terms of my gender identity being affected by healthcare, I also think it's in terms of just like general care and practices. Things like getting a physical, I have a very hard time with, just with like doctors even wanting to perform a physical, or because I'm medically transitioning and my body looks different and I have a male doctor. How does the male doctor know how to treat me, right, when my body's changing? And so thinking about that has been front and center. And even thinking around like sexual practices. I recently requested a full lab, just because in the queer and trans world, we get tested twice a year minimum. And so requesting that full lab, like my doctor was asking me, like, has your practices changed? I can't approve it unless if you answer all these questions, when the reality is they should just approve it because I'm the client and that's what I need for my kid. So I think I'll stop there and I'll pass it to Hector.
Thanks, Camila.
Gracias, everyone. No, it hasn't impacted me whatsoever.
Mentiroso.
Of course, it impacts everything. Similar to Malo, there's a lot of unknowns. And so there's a lot of teaching that we do as well within our experience to our providers. I know that, for example, testosterone has impacted my hair growth and follicle length. And so it wasn't until I actually consulted with a hair restoration um, doctor that they were actually a lot of medications and alternatives and treatments that can be done as well to prevent as well to promote hair growth. And so that's one example of how the testosterone is impacting my body and the impact, and then how knowing that that's the impact it's going to have, then what then can be provided to be able to support those changes throughout the body. And that is still a medical exploration that I know City of Hope and various providers are a part of that. And so being in the middle of it is very interesting, as you're discovering things for your about yourself as you're moving through this process. I think as trans people, one of the strongest key to our care is a lot of self documentation, self reflection, self awareness, to be able to gauge for ourselves, being able to journal different ways that our voice, behavior, habits, odor
Yeah.
is changing, is all very insightful, and something that I know transmasculine folks do on a personal level. And it's also a practice that can be implemented by providers as suggestions of how to be able, or even therapists, to be able to support people in being able to track transition. So we know that for myself, I'm also an immigrant and documented immigrant in California. We're fortunate to have the Health for All policy legislation that was fully implemented at the beginning of this year. So regardless of immigration status, in California, it is your income that matters for Medi-Cal. And under Medi-Cal, you're able to receive gender affirming care and surgeries. And so being able to also be in the line of work where we're able to create resources to elevate that information. A lot of my experience has been I learn a lot, and I try to see how to be able to share that information, and when possible, also see if there's opportunity for policy change.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, like, I'm glad you brought that up, Hector, because I think that's one of the things that I see is that just because you make something available doesn't mean people get to it. Yeah, and so I think that's why it's so important with all of our community leaders here that a big part of gender affirming care is engagement, and ensuring like that these services get out there, and people don't go, they people won't go to someplace they don't trust, and so they need sort of that vetting by someone that they trust to do that. Um, so I try over the years, like I've tried to sort of steer away from, this sort of trauma-based information, where, even though there's a lot of trauma that surrounds our care, and so um, sort of the high rate of it's like suicidal ideation, um, that gets improved with like gender affirming care, right? Like those numbers kind of go down when they have access to gender affirming care. And so I think that's why like these spaces are so important that we transform them. And that transformation means that we have to go in and disrupt the norm, which you guys are, a lot of you have taught me how to do that. And so I'm humbled that we get to do this panel. As I said before, like the discrimination that's faced by transgender patients is high. I think like the general transgender population reports about 50% of them said they felt discriminated against in healthcare. Um, but when you look at BIPOC transgender, the number goes up to like 68%, you know, and there goes a different animal, right? That sort of intersectional experience that we oftentimes have to deal with. Um, and so my next question is, what effect has your race and ethnicity um, uh, played in your gender specific healthcare needs? Like, how has that presented itself? If it has, how has it presented itself in regards to sort of your experience in your gender specific health needs?
I'll jump in. As I mentioned before, there is no current data to reflect thoughtfully on the long term effects of testosterone therapy on transgender men, let alone by race and ethnicity. So to be able to have like cultural humility and competency in a healthcare setting in order to capture nuances of what might influence my health outcome because of my intersectional identity of being Fatane, a Samoan transgender man. Uh, we could probably look at like the BMI, the body mass index, and how unfair it is that they would probably look at my body type and, it'll be higher than a Caucasian transgender man. And, I would have to like probably lose a lot of weight compared to some other transgender man because I am someone in order to receive like top surgery. And then I also wanted to bring up something about realizing that pre-pandemic as well as post-pandemic, Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander community has always struggled with comorbidities such as diabetes, heart disease, and cancer. So how do we incorporate these particular health conditions with a plausible plan for gender affirming care for Pasifika trans men and or women?
Others?
I think for me, one of the first things that comes to my mind is, as people of color, it's more often than not we speak another language other than English as a first language, and so being born and raised in Samoa and like being my first language is Samoan, and English was something that I had to learn through school. Um, there's like a lot of trauma that comes with like having to communicate in English, and I think like I'm a little bit more confident these days after like just so many experiences. And but I remember just having to go through a hospital and not understand a lot of like what I was looking for. And it's one thing to have to navigate services in a different language, the one that's not yours. And then medical terminology is like a whole monster in itself. And so it just like it's like almost like, for lack of a better word, like a double down barrier for you. And so that's like one of the first things that I always think about. And it's like, it's not just in medical, but like even in understanding policy work, and seeing like how disengaged our people tend to be from like issues that affect them, from getting services that is meaningful to them, and that is, that we need. Um, and I always, on top of that, I think about just the lack of, even Samoan Pacific Islander um, doctors. Like, we're very fortunate to have people like Dr. Samoa. I'm sorry, I have to say Dr. Samoa.
I forgive
Dr.
you.
And then, like, a few others that we have met through the work here in Washington, but still that number is like very low compared to like the amount of people that we have here that need services from people that understand them. Sitting with someone and talking about your care with them in a way where you don't have to kind of educate them on how to provide the care for you. Um, there's so much more that makes up like all of our identities. It's not just gender, it's also race, and all of those things play such a vital role, um, individually, in the care that we receive and the care that we deserve.
Yeah, thanks, Tepa. Uh, Camila?
I'm sitting with this question, Ray, because I think for myself, I immediately started thinking about the connection between healthcare and workforce development for trans individuals. I used to sit on the Trans-Latina Coalition's Community Advisory Board for 2 years, and a lot of what we learned in my time there as a community advisory board member was that TGI people are not only impacted in healthcare settings, but really undocumented trans people in the local region are having problems just like getting a license so that they can sell some type of a merch, or even thinking about street vendors and seeing ways that street vendors can get access to different ways of workforce development is like for front and center on my mind. And so when I think about this question, I think about workforce development, but I also think about a lot of the stigma that still exists within our own race, right? I think about like the internalized racism of folks as we navigate this current period, in our current presidential administration, as y'all know, but also thinking around a lot of the stigma that still exists, the tropes that still exist from Latina community, traditionally cis individuals who think about like who don't see trans people as people, right? And so, what does it mean when we exist in a community and also exist alongside community that doesn't take our humanity into consideration? And so, I think we can see it in healthcare settings, we can see it in workforce development settings, and it's everywhere really, from the boardroom to the shopping cart, right? And so, I think it's just important to think about like my own the way that I've been impacted. I mean, so that's the way that I think about. I think about my community.
Yeah, yeah, I see that. Like it's kind of the dismantling of the system by infusing yourself into the system, which speaks to justice on a higher level of treatment. It speaks to inclusion. You know what I mean? Like if you have more providers, so that's one of the reasons. So I apologize that that it's me that's facilitating this panel, because I'm waiting for the transgender physician to show up. So that they can be in this space. But until they can be in this space, we call for their inclusion. Which means we have to go to schools to start telling kids to go into medicine, and advocate once they get in there. So kind of like what you're saying, Camila, like that whole workforce thing is beyond just the exam room. It's into the educational system, so that our social determinants are more equitable. Yeah, and so Tepa speaks about like actually like wanted to ask Tepa uh, and Camila and Hector this idea of like of ethnicity and race and the intersection of um, culture and gender identity, right? How has that influenced your advocacy? Because I know you guys have done projects. Actually, I'll open this to everybody. Um, like in your work, what like what are things that you found to move the needle when it comes to providing? Because you know the one of the things that also improves sort of the suicide rates in transgender youth is access to cultural spaces. Um, but in our cutie pie study that we did, we showed that about 70% of queer and trans Pacific Islanders reported discrimination in their own cultural space. You know, um, so, you know, what like anybody on the panel, what have you seen sort of help bridge those worlds? Because Camila, you mentioned it real briefly, in regards to how do you get and I'll be blunt, like for Black and Brown people, how do you bridge that divide? Because you're not only dealing with discrimination in healthcare, you know, your support system that's supposed to help you um, uh, uh, be resilient against the problems with healthcare is also discriminating against you. Yeah. So how do you make that? How do you bridge that?
I think for myself, I've learned that just as much as I find that there are community members who, want to restrict my rights, want to restrict my voice in many ways. I think about the community that stands even louder and prouder, right? Thinking about when I was in college, I was a part of a group called La Familia de Colores, and essentially it was just like a group of LGBTQ plus Latina folks really thinking around ways that they can continue moving forward and moving the needle. And so I think for myself, I think about how intentionally becoming a staff member at California Latinas for Reproductive Justice, a statewide organization that does work specifically centering reproductive justice, personal bodily autonomy, if, when, and how to have a children, really allowed me to think about ways that transgender people have not been traditionally included in conversations around reproductive justice. And reproductive justice really encompasses a whole area and realm of different types of policies and initiatives. And so we can see it through the realm of like immigrant justice, we can see it through the realm of workforce development, but really thinking around intentionally moving to an organization that is learning and also wanting to center LGBTQ, specifically TGI individuals more was very intentional and very purposeful. And so, I'm also moving alongside everyone. In some rooms they're more affirming. In other rooms, I'm still like learning as well.
Yeah, like trying to sort of reclaim or establish space in your cultural community. It's a lot of work. Yeah. And so a lot of it is re-education. So Manumalo identifies as Fatane, but Tepa and I identify as Fafafinge. So it's an indigenous queer and trans Pacific Islander identity, but it doesn't map well to like Western sexual orientation and gender identity, right? Because Tepa and I do not have the same sexual orientation or the same gender identity, but we have the same Pacific Islander indigenous identity, you know. And so, that's the thing that I think has because the homophobia that we face in our cultural environment oftentimes keeps younger generations from uncovering their indigenous identity, right? A lot of times when I tell people, oh, I'm a queer trans Pacific Islander, a lot of younger people will tell me, um, I'm gay. Like they're like I'm not queer or trans, I'm gay. And it's like, yeah, I mean, that's the if you define yourself by Western categories, there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah, but if you use our Pacific Islander indigenous identities, we don't have identities that define each other based on who we sleep with, or our sexual acts, right? It's a different definition of identity that doesn't translate. There are no English words that translate for us. Anyway, um, so let me get back to sort of our question. Um, Ama, Malo, Hector, Tepa. So this space where you because you guys do a really good job of getting into cultural spaces, but bringing yourself into that space, and transforming that once you get in there. I think part of that is the leverage you have as community leaders. But how have you navigated that space?
Yeah, I'll
I can
chime in.
go. Oh, Tapa.
Oh,
Oh,
Amma,
I think my
you want
my
to go?
network is kind of very unstable,
Right.
so probably I'll go well. Um, I think we've been having this conversation internally, from both personal and also political. I think one thing that we have to think about as trans people, or as LGBTQI people, is that our personal is political and the political is personal, and that these two are not so separate from one another. And I say this because, for a lot of us, as a Vakasalele, one of the things that we also very proudly as Pacific Island people is our identity and how we use that in different spaces, in social spaces, especially even within our own Pacific Island community. And then our trans identity is a way that is very much over politicized in a way that we're able to influence a lot of things. And I think for me is that our identity, whether trans and also cultural identity, has been politicized because one thing is very common, and you said that, Dr. Samoa, colonialization or colonialism has become a permanent condition for a lot of us that do this work, whether it's about our culture and identity, whether it's also about social justice movement, it's in any kind of movement. That colonialism is ingrained in the way that we work. And I think that the only way to go about this is we know what trans people go through, on a daily basis, and from the different intersectional identity that we hold as a human being, but also the different intersectional issues that we see. And like Tepper said, from language and then from socioeconomic, the challenges, the limited access to resources, and even the way that the health system is very westernized and it's in within the healthcare system. I think it's important as Mahu, as Vaxalelo, as Fafafine that do this work here in diaspora, we have so much resources and research. Dr. Samoa is such an amazing thing, and it speaks to a lot of the things that we go through, from health to climate and environment, and even to biodiversity. And it's very all linked to one another, intersectional to one another, and live on each other. And I think that's the beauty about the work, and it's a beauty being able to still have this conversation, but also to build on ideas, on amazing trans leaders who've kind of always coming up with ideas to shape our activism in different ways. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Manu Malo.
Yeah, thanks, Amma. Uh, what I noticed going into cultural spaces, in particular with the Pasifika Trans Men Network, that wasn't highlighted or in my QTPI organizing prior, was catching wind of gender based violence or domestic violence. So that was something that I had to pivot and pay more attention than in years prior. That had an impact in how they navigated through life, if they even received gender affirming care, because their life was at risk, their safety was questionable. Um, so that also led to the kind of housing availability uh, was available for folks in my network. Um, so yeah, gender-based violence and domestic violence happens in every cultural community, but when it happens in a marginalized demographic like your queer and trans population, it makes it even more so an issue when you're having to deal with basic life necessities and your safety for your life. So, it is a problem that happens in our cultural community. Um, but then just imagine for a marginalized demographic. Um, it's even harder to do any type of meaningful support organizing within the community to discuss this issue. But thank you, Ray, for bringing it up, because that was something that, I had to pay closer attention to. And how do we talk about these taboo topics within our own community, um, where it's prevalent and we never had that discussion before?
Yeah, I think so. What you mentioned and what Alma talked about was what's taken from us. Like we the settler colonialism that's kind of like infused into our culture has upheld like the queer phobia, the transphobia, and so we don't get to talk about it, but we don't get to reclaim our authentic culture until we do that. Yeah. And so having these thoughtful discussions within our community, I think, is important. And for Alma, like, one of the things we did with our brown paper was go through these identities, and some identities got wiped out. The Fafafinge and Fatana, at least the word stayed. In some of the Pacific cultures, they got wiped out with Christianity, and so they're only reclaiming it now. And so a lot of like kind of what's being done now is taking these terms and reclaiming them, but now redefining them amongst agreed upon by community. So, and then I teach gender affirming care to a lot of these physicians. And so I was lucky to run them by Mapumaya. So the two physicians that are in Mapumaya are Samoan, and so they're able to sort of do the care in language. And so when somebody reached out to me in one of the clinics in East LA, and they're like, "Hey, can you teach it?" I was a little bit hesitant. I was like, necesitas enseñar en español porque las palabras son diferentes. And I don't speak Spanish well enough to teach it. But it has to be done because the cultural context is different, the words are different, you know. And so to me, like when Manu Malo and Hector talk about like there are no studies that look at what we're talking about is guidelines, best practice. And they're starting to come out with guidelines and best practice for general transgender care, but we just talked about how that care can be different for like black and brown people. And so I think one of the things that our communities sort of need to do is how do we develop best practice? How do we develop guidelines for BIPOC transgender? And so I'm selfishly plugging that because I want to do that with all of you guys. But that's another talk. And so, Tepa, Hector.
Yes, I think Malo, Ray, and Amma, like you all talked about something that was just like just hit home for me when I think about intersectionality, being Pacific Islander, someone, and then also being a trans woman. That many times when there's not enough light shed on the health impacts on Pacific Islander communities, Samoan communities, that even when we come together as that community, I often feel like I'm still left out of those conversations as a trans woman, as a Fa'afafine. And I think it's important for us, to show up in those spaces and talk about how, those impacts affect us, because if we're not there, they may never come up. And I recently had an experience where, and Ray, you were there, where we were at a conference where we saw that the whole conference started with like a whole church service and everything. And so immediately with that experience, I was like, am I in a space where when I talk about this, it's going to be welcomed, because I'm around a lot of Christians. And so looking at colonization, like Amo talked about, also like looking at how deeply that's um, infiltrated culture and like our own people, and how we've adopted a lot of those values that often invisibilize the existence and the needs of Fa'afafine Fatane. And it's challenging, like, and I often think about, like, Ray, you and I had this conversation too about like it's 2024, and like yet nobody is willing to offer hormone replacement therapy in American Samoa, right? And that also speaks to the culture that it holds, and speaks to the culture that religion has shaped there. And it's quite sad. Like every month we see at least a handful of folks that actually travel all the way from Samoa to see Mapumaya Clinic. One, because it's free, but then second, because it's very low barrier to them. Like they can see the doctors here without insurance. They can see a doctor here that understands that. And it's always a challenge for me, and I can imagine the same for a lot of my siblings who are from Samoa as well, to have those conversations with our own community and see why gender affirming care is so important to us and how life saving it is for us. And a lot of the times when we talk about estrogen and testosterone, I've heard the jokes. I've heard the jokes from like fellow Samoans, like that's poison. You're putting poison in your body, and there's such a lack of understanding and just a lack of education overall in like. Really the science behind hormones and like it's like it's hormones. You and I both have it. I just need a little bit more of this.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I'm always shocked when people ask me, like, and it's weird, like, no other sort of aspect of medicine do people have more opinions about with no knowledge. Yeah. And so oftentimes people are asked, like, oh, so, like, why are you pushing gender affirming care? Why are you and I'm like, same reason why oncologists push cancer care, because it saves lives, you know. And so this is not like people doing something in their garage. This is based on evidence. This is based on science, and it keeps people well and it keeps people alive. And so I think like hammering that message to even people in our community, like telling other Pacific Islanders, like, are you okay with Pacific Islanders dying? Because you have like some type of moral objection to their existence. And when you reframe it in those contexts, the judgment seems to is maybe still be there, but it's not as loud. It's not as voiced. But it also means that we have the tireless duty of saying something, right? Like a lot of times somebody will say something transphobic in Spanish, and because they think I don't understand it, and I'm like, okay, we're in the space where you may think that this is okay behavior, but there are other people that need to that you're going to share space with, that now I have to interact, right? And so it's not just about like me having the energy. It's about the next, the people around that are using this space, that are coming to the clinic for care in their vulnerable state, that they shouldn't have to put up with that kind of behavior. um, and so kudos because I see you guys do it often. Like you often show up, you often disrupt. And so hence why you guys are on the panel. Hector?
Sí, gracias. Wanted to share some tips and tricks for best practices because I know when we speak about intersection, colonization, even racism and ethnicity itself, it just doesn't land with community, and we need practical ways and clear direction for our community in order for them to get the care that they need, and also so that we can advocate effectively for them. And so our tips and tricks are compromise and simplify. Compromise in terms of, Tepa gave a great example of, I was in a church and I don't want to be there, and I knew I had to be there. Similarly, on a personal level, I was at a family event, I don't want to be there, and I knew I had to be there. So I think we understand that as trans and queer people, that every relationship that we have, every relationship we have with people that are not trans and queer, there's a certain level of compromise that we make in the relationship in order to have the relationship. So as heartbreaking as that is our lives, and how we navigate it. It's constant compromising, and that brings us to compromise in all space and relationships. If you don't like the word compromise, use reframe, use adapt, use adjust, use survival, use whatever word really resonates to kind of have it sink in that that's part of the navigation that we have to do. And then it's a matter of problem solving. So that's our experience and part of our lives. And then it's how do we solve that? There needs to be some sort of connection and education that needs to take place, and that connection and education needs to be simple. So when we say LGBTQIA2S plus, it does not land. So we have been partnering with the San Gabriel Valley LGBTQ Center to really reframe how we speak about trans and queer people in the region, and that's where we landed. We're using trans and queer. Trans is non-cis, queer is non-heterosexual. So when we say trans, we're speaking about gender and sex, who someone is. When we say a queer, that is who someone likes or loves. That is someone's heterosexuality. So being able to simplify even gender, sex versus sexuality, that has been an effective starting point in being able to make that connection. And then we can further make the connection that gender, sex, and sexuality is a human experience overall. It is not limited to just trans and queer people. It is something that we all experience. And if it's something that we all experience, then it's something that we can connect with. Similar to transition for transgender people, we all transition various times in one lifetime. And so being able to recognize that transgender people hold an expertise to that, and being able to connect that to the human experience, has also been found to be effective in making that simple connection and education while navigating the difficult compromises that we make in every space and every relationship that we hold. Gracias.
Thank you, Hector. I'm going to take all of that. That's going to go into my next talk. Um, uh, yeah, and
How dare
so
you, Ray, with credit.
you didn't copyright it. You didn't copyright it. So yeah, you speak about like compromising or reframing, um, and I think that's why it's important, like that we get buy-in in the greater LGBTQ plus community, because we have different access. We have different access points, where, like I said, like Tep and I are Fafafinge, but um, I may have more access in Western society because I'm cis presenting, um, but like I had different access into Samoan culture, because of that, because I'm not like what the tradition, what the Western view of a fafafinge is. I don't have that kind of access into those spaces. So, people will have like queer jokes in Samoan culture, but in Western culture, they'll have all the trans jokes right in front of you. And so they'll feel comfortable telling you those jokes because they don't think you're identifying. You don't have any base in that. So I think it's important to use those tools that Hector said, so that we can advocate, with our different access points. So I did want to get to sort of the heart of kind of why we're here. um, what actions can doctors and healthcare systems take to provide more affirming care? um, and so, I think Manu Malo talked about like the BMI, ethnic and racial specific BMIs being limiting factors in regards to different gender affirming surgeries. And so that would be kind of like one way. Clinical guidelines would be another way. Does anybody have any other thoughts in regards to sort of how we can, and also didn't want to minimize Camila's point earlier, in regards to workforce, like changing workforce as a huge impact on healthcare itself. So that being said, what are your thoughts as to how to make the system work better? Ama, you look like you're ready.
I can go ahead if I think I'm talking too much.
No, you're not.
But I think really, just from listening to everyone here and listening to trans women and looking at the real outcome from the Mapumai, Utopia Mapumai Clinic, center us in these conversations and center us to also trust us to tell you what would really work for our community. And that means to also listen to transgender patients, listen to trans people who are providing these services, and also integrate a lot of the feedbacks that we are starting to hear from healthcare and I think that also the thing that really makes us stand our ground in also to talk about policy work is because we know the work that the Mapumaya Clinic is doing is amazing, and that we get to do that to influence policy. And also, it has to do with cultural awareness. Providers should learn about cultural context, specifically like us as Pacific Islander. Our views on gender is very fluid and it's sacred, and it also provides a very respectful and relevant care that is about people, that is also centered around love, safety, and that when we do listen to trans people and how trans healthcare should look like, we won't be having this conversation continuously, constantly to remind people and to even tell ourselves. But I think it's important that we really, really, really center trans people to really talk about what's important for us.
Thanks, Ahmad. Like, yeah, I really like the centering piece. Um, yeah, just like a real quick story because it has something to do with like, and Camila, I want you to comment. Um, is So we had an opportunity to sort of interview fellows. So fellowships are programs where you learn specialty. So my specialty is endocrinology. That's the specialty that does gender affirming care. And so, every year we have applicants apply to the fellowship program. And so one year we had a transgender applicant. So, I'm and really good credentials, right? So I'm 100% in. I'm trying to get that person into our program. Um, and the comments I heard in regards to the application were things like, "Oh, it doesn't feel like would fit our culture. I don't know if they'd be like the best fit for our program." And couldn't really explain, like, and mind you, like, I knew, I like, without being able to call people transphobic, it was like this sort of subtle transphobia this uncomfortableness because you don't, because you don't know how to say it, is the exact thing that, like, doctors have to call out. It's the same thing when, like, people of color apply to a position, and people say things like, "I just don't know what it is." There's something that, that they gravitate towards someone else, and they can't say it. And so, one of the things I often tell people in health equity work is, if you cannot articulate it, there's a good chance that, it's rooted in bias. If you cannot describe it, then there's a bias that you're using to make your decision. you know and so, I think that speaks to kind of who's still there, like who's still making decisions that affect your care. Camila.
Well, really, I think that I'm sitting with this question because I think the biggest thing that's coming up for me is I'm thinking about like the way that folks get classified, even trans in the system, right? There's a level of like having to tell your sob story. There's a level of experiencing pain all over again. There's a level of reliving trauma so that you can let folks know the degree of your gender dysphoria. And I think I'll also say that it's important to think about like that certain types of gender affirming care aren't included currently. Like they will cover hair removal for certain body parts, but if you want to get leg hair removal, your insurance won't cover that. No matter how much you describe like the dysphoria that you're getting for like just leg hair, like they won't cover it, and so it has to come out of pocket for trans people. And so, what does it mean when like they only cover pieces like obviously the goodies and all the other stuff, right? But they're not going to cover the rest of your body. So trans people have to make money. They have to pay for their own care. Or they have to find temporary solutions that work for the meantime. I am a person who I get my legs waxed once a month, but it's, if I didn't have a job and, I don't think I would have the ability to do that, and as much as I described my dysphoria to my care team, because it's not covered through Kaiser. Like there's no much how much I can scream about it that like my leg hair bothers me, that they're not going to cover it through insurance. And so it ends up on the onus ends up back on the person again. And then I will also share, I know that the Placencia team did a really great effort through our San Gabriel Valley Pride Tour on creating like an educate and activate in the San Gabriel Valley. So I know there's like a lot more like practical ways as well when we think about ways that practitioners can serve the community.
I think that's your cue, Hector.
Sí, gracias. I know Tepa had her hand up
Oh,
before that.
step up.
I don't know if you wanted to share first, Tepa.
She's graciously offering you the floor, Hector.
Oh, sí, gracias. So we have developed a few resources that we'd like to share. I'm not sure how the chat works, but I put here in the chat a resource, a guide for trans and queer immigrant health in California. So it really guides what services are available. To our knowledge, there wasn't a community resource before this that really laid out what all of the different services that are covered under Medi-Cal. And even then, our objective is really to shift culture when we think about access to health care for trans and queer people, as well as for immigrant people. So what we would really love to elevate, and providers to be able to elevate as well, is the complaint process. Being able to encourage folks to be able to file a complaint, file a claim, so that when it comes to working with institutions, we need to be able to document everything that is taking place and happening for trans and queer people. We're fortunate to be able to work with statewide organizations as well, where we're connected with folks that actually receive the complaints and firsthand have seen how they take the complaints and implement into policy change or processes change within how they conduct their care. So also wanting to share stories like that, because it is possible. Yes, we know these everything that we envision and being able to provide in terms of systems for our communities. There are opportunities to be able to get there, and it helps if we complain about the care that we are not receiving, or the care that we are receiving, that it is medically negligent, that it is not comprehensive, and it is really the importance of being able to it's important to also elevate the urgency of the need to be able to fix these different components of care for people, in addition to advancing your own needs in your care. So within this resource, we also walk people through what the process is of complaining, and within our culture shift, have us as a community understand that complaining is just part of the process. If we can get to a place where we understand that complaining is just a part of the process, then we can facilitate and ease the process of complaining, and confronting institutions in these different ways. What I've known and learned as well from being both in advocacy for immigrant rights and queer and trans justice spaces is that we all need to work on our relationships with systems, and how we engage with them, how we think about them, how we essentially use them to be able to receive the care, access, and protections that we need. Yes, we are in contentious tension because our needs are not consistently being met, and also people who are purposeful in positions of influence and power. That is our role. We are put in positions where we need to be able to navigate those difficult spaces, find opportunities, while at the same time caring for our mind, body, heart, so we can continue to be in those spaces. So thinking about how can we, in understanding the system and how it functions, how then can we use their avenues for complaining and creating these sorts of change that can help us advance the access, protections, and safety that is needed under medical care.
I hear you. I hear you a lot. And I'm glad you're on the commission and you're chair. Um, uh, so one of the things that we talk about with safety is sort of the lack of understanding that gender affirming care, the majority of gender affirming care is given to cis heterosexual people, right? Like pap smears, TRT, all of these things are consistent with gender affirming care. And so the attacks on gender affirming care, I mean, the attacks on like body autonomy, the attacks on how does that have any signal on your, the for transgender patients? Like, is there any kind of parallel with kind of what's going on with the attacks on bodily autonomy, um, and kind of the care of transgender patients? Tepa, Malo?
Well, in terms of like reproductive care, it is a transgender and transmasculine issue for anybody who's able to be a birthing person. So when we think about body autonomy or bodily autonomy, no one ever includes non-binary or transmasculine identifying people as being part of that group that is impacted by certain type of legislation that would remove the option of an abortion or any of the other suite of care that you may need. Again, eligible birthing people. It does apply to us. Nobody ever includes us in the larger discussion. So I think just being respectful about that piece. But I also, Ray, I also wanted to add on to like certain things that can be done in healthcare in terms of either at your hospital or another healthcare system. I was thinking about like committing to revise onboarding and or incumbent training and curriculum to manage transgender patients better. Maybe even preparing a fact sheet on their expectations for their level of care, especially after the elections. Um, what will their treatment, be like? Will it change? Will their hormone therapy treatment be impacted? Will there be delays, for their scheduled surgeries? Just something to calm some of their transgender patients that might be thinking about what do I need to do in the next couple of months.
Mhm.
Something else that I was thinking about was data collection, as I mentioned in previous responses. The ability to document actions. Like, do you have an inclusive intake form that captures SOGI, sexual orientation, gender identity, and also like real D information, race, ethnicity,
Mhm.
and language and disability. Um, Another piece is something similar to this panel that you convened. Is it possible for your hospital or a healthcare setting to establish a transgender patient support advisory committee?
Mhm.
Uh, so those are just some things that come to mind of what would be really nice if like someone stepped into Kaiser or whoever their healthcare provider, they had these things for transgender patients.
I'm just stealing everybody's idea, just so we know right now. I'm just putting it out there. Um, uh, yeah, there is a best practice. The AAMC put out a best practice for medical centers in regards to affirming care, LGBTQ plus affirming care, not specifically the gender affirming, but and so one of the things though is there's nobody who does a report card. Like the best practice guidelines are out there, and I've heard nobody's like done any type of, well, okay, who's holding these hospitals to task to say they're adhering to these? Because the JCO is the sort of body that accredits hospitals and makes sure that they're certified or licensed or whatever, and there is no JCO for this. So I think like us speaking louder about these advisory committees, but also where's your accountability, in regards to this, I think is crucial. um, Tepa?
Um, as the conversation keeps going, I keep losing my train of thoughts too. But I wanted to respond to the question before, and so definitely doubling down on what Camila was sharing about workforce development. What does it look like for big hospitals to invest in like a pipeline to medical profession for underrepresented communities? That includes like maybe recruiting trans people who actually have a dream of becoming physicians, becoming surgeons. What does it look like for DEI programs in those hospitals to just even go beyond the training within their systems and investing in that type of like recruiting members from community to pursue um, healthcare profession, and then like all of the other things like this smaller things that have like such a huge impact that were mentioned, like what do intake forms look like? Is it being considerate of like people's pronouns? And I understand that sometimes there are certain procedures and stuff that require you to understand what sex assigned at birth is, but like how can we collect that information without re-triggering people and in a very respectful way? What does it look like to provide cross-cultural training across the whole hospital, not just the doctors, but even like nurses and receptionists and so forth? Because one of the things I always think about is like your care starts from the moment you step foot inside the clinic or the hospital, even in the lobby. And it's like, how can we not cause harm before people are actually seeing the doctor? And so, like, I think about like an experience that I had where I was sitting in the lobby and the person came to call my name, and immediately they said, is Mr. Vaina here? And like I stood up so embarrassingly because like I was in the room full, like a lobby full of people, and I walked with her, and she looked at me. She's like, "I'm sorry, it's Miss Mina," and it's like, it, maybe you should have thought about that before. You know what I mean? Like maybe you shouldn't have assumed just by looking at like whatever documents that you collected, because people appear differently and it may not be what you expected. But now like the harm has been done. I don't want to sit in that hospital anymore. I don't want to see that doctor because I don't feel safe and I don't feel comfortable or even seen in that space. So I think like that type of like training across the board is still very much important, like to this day. And then in connection again to what Camila was saying, it's like there are still a lot of like health insurance providers who still tend to like pick and choose which procedures should be covered based on what they believe is gender affirming and is medically necessary. And it's still under the notion that a lot of this is cosmetic, which is just crazy. But like I think about like one of the things that we have struggled here in Washington with, and mind you, Washington passed a law like about a few years ago, which prohibits any health insurance here to discriminate gender affirming procedures based on what they consider cosmetic or not. But somehow there are still a lot of our community members who we're still helping to fight and repeal like a lot of the decisions that are made by health insurances on what is medically necessary. So what does it look like for our physicians to be also those champions with us to support us in those repeals and like help us explain and sad to say, but try to prove to like insurance providers that this is absolutely medically necessary. Yes.
Thanks, Tepa. So we're about 5 minutes over, but I do want to give you an opportunity. Um, so this is your commercial time. I want you to be able to promote whatever you need to promote at this point. And so uh, think about like kind of what you guys got going on, because everybody has a ton of stuff that's going on, and I want to make sure that we communicate like across the channels what you guys have going on. Um, uh, we'll start with Malo.
Of course. So for folks, folks who are out there who are concerned about their gender affirming care, talk to your providers. A lot of people are like, should I stock up with my testosterone? For the impending administration that's going to take place in January. Um, in order for you to like move with confidence during really uncertain times, you know, check in, with your providers early and map out a plan. Map out a plan for your health care. A lot of folks that I'm also talking to are trying to relocate from red states or locations to the West Coast. Um, that's going to take some massive planning, so reach out to your friends so that they could direct you to some local resources. And just know that you're beautiful. You're unique. You're rare. You're here during this time, and you do have a lot of friends that can be here to support you.
Yeah, I felt attacked when Hector was talking about hair, and so thank you for that affirmation. Um, any events that you want to promote or plug right now, Malo?
Just be safe, folks. You know, take care of yourself, but no particular events.
Okay, Camila.
I'll share some of the work that I'm doing in both organizations. So at the San Gabriel Valley LGBTQ Center, we are actually we just hired paid staff to do a research study in the San Gabriel Valley. So in January, we're going to be creating a needs assessment for folks that live, work, and play in the local region. Hector is one of the leads of our project, so I'll let them speak more about it if they'd like. What I want to share also is just in the realm at California Latinas for Reproductive Justice, something that I think LGBTQ folks forget, and even for myself, is we're currently creating a one-pager specifically talking about young parents and young parenthood and youth sexuality. And so something that we're seeing right now is a lot of folks who are young parents will separate with their partner at an early age in their early 20s and then come out later in life. And so what does it mean when we're not providing services for young parents or birthing folks who are already having kids, right? And are LGBTQ are in their young 20s or 30s, navigating parenthood for the first time. And so we're creating a one pager that specifically says what young parents in Los Angeles County would like to and need, and that's going to be released early 2025. So I will disseminate it to this group and also online when that gets released.
And by the way, Camila's like broadcasting live and direct from the airport, because we don't let no traveling stop us do anything, right? Um, Tepa?
Just real quick, next week, Wednesday, on November 20th, is Transgender Day of Remembrance. Utopia, Washington is hosting an event at Green River College from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. So if you happen to be in the area or in the States, we invite you to join us. It's a yearly event that we put on to honor the lives of our trans siblings who are taken yearly in the name of violence and hate. But also, I'd also like to use this to plug in Mapumaya Clinic again as a resource for anyone that is looking for a free clinic. It doesn't always have to be gender affirming care. Yes, we were founded under the premise of providing it to our own community, but we have the resources to be able to serve just about anyone. We offer primary care. Our doctors are equipped to do that, and so is our full-time nurse. So if you are uninsured, underinsured, even undocumented, you are welcome to come to the clinic, and we would love to meet you. So even if the folks on here have community members or family members even in the area, please let them know. We are based in Kent. We are open Monday through Friday. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, we have night clinics, so we open a little late up till 7 p.m. But Monday, Wednesday, Friday, we are open from 9 to 5 p.m. And also, if you just want a clinic where you feel that there is an armor of trans women around you that makes you just feel safer being in the clinic, we are that clinic. I am there, and there are so many. 90% of our staff at the clinic are trans women and
Trans women of color. Yeah.
Yes, that too.
Yeah. Yeah. So if for everybody who has not, and I would strongly recommend, whether you're in the community or an ally, to visit the SGV LGBTQ Center in El Monte. But also, the offices in Kent of Utopia, Washington, and the Mapumaya Clinic, which is right across the street. They are eye-opening, and so it's worth your time to go check out, those things in action. Hector?
Sí, gracias. We invite you to visit hectorplacencia.com for those resources. We actually have that brochure in 8 different languages for trans and queer immigrants. So we have Chinese, Creole, English, Korean, Punjabi, Spanish, Tagalog, and Vietnamese. And working to see how we can have more languages translated and printed for community. As Camila mentioned, we work very closely with the SGV LGBTQ Center. We are launching a research study of the San Gabriel Valley, the first of its kind, launching in March. We'll also have some focus groups working closely with City of Hope and the Pasadena Public Health Department as well for research oversight and guidance. And with the SGV LGBTQ Center, we also have an annual event called the San Gabriel Valley Pride Tour, where in the month of June, we visit different cities in the San Gabriel Valley celebrating throughout the region and throughout the month. So look for that in June. And also, we invite you, if you are in LA County, to be a part of the LGBTQ Commission meetings and developing work. You can visit our work at lgbtq.lacounty.gov. We have monthly meetings and are tasked with being able to uh, set forth system change for trans and queer people in the city of LA County. Large undertaking, and we can do it much better if we work together. So we hope to see you there. Gracias.
We'll send somebody in our family to go to your meetings, Hector.
Please.
Yeah. Ama?
Thank you. I think I'll close by just also reiterating that, our communities are also at the front line of the impact of climate and environment inequality, and that we know that there's a specific focus to that and health. And I think it's important that we continue to have this conversation about land and health, and also to say that on December 10th, Utopia Washington will be launching our first ever community research study that's looking at the impact of climate change on LGBTQI people on December 10th, but also to celebrate Human Rights Day. And so, thank you, Dr. Samoa. You've been an inspiration to us to do research and data and to really collect that. And I also just want to close by saying that, because we live in the world and that we also nurture diversity in all people, really, but really centering those that are very marginalized in our community. And that to do this and to understand that it helps us to better equip, the world that we live in to nurture diversity and care that is centered in and around the amazing work that all of you do here. And I also thank you, Dr. Samuel, for your leadership and your hard work, and look
Yeah.
forward to other amazing conversations like this in the future. And thank you
Great.
very much. And look out for that research study.
I
Thank
will.
you.
I will. You know me, I'm a research geek. Um, I just realized that you guys have been chatting this whole time. I didn't even look over to see that you guys were making comments. So apologies if I wasn't ignoring you on purpose. I'm old. Um, Logan, is there anything you want to plug for Pride in the City?
Not necessarily. We'll probably be at Altadena Pride again, and then one of the two city prides. But I want to thank you all for allowing me in your space. It's been tremendously illuminating. You guys are tremendously insightful. This has been an exceptional opportunity, so I greatly appreciate that. And I want to thank you, Ray, and your partner for all that you do for the community. So this is wonderful. Thank you so much. I
Thanks, Logan.
cannot
Thanks.
thank you guys enough.
Yeah, Altadena Pride. So that's where I live. That's our stop on the Pride, the SGV Pride Tour. Um, just some quick things. So I belong to the Cutie Pie Village. The Cutie Pie Village is launching their brown paper on World AIDS Day. The community rollout is on World AIDS Day, which is December 1st. And so a white paper, is a paper that is kind of argumentative, that speaks about policy changes. A brown paper is basically doing that, but using indigenous processes to develop recommendations, because we like to make up our own things. So the brown paper is web-based. It's on the Utopia Washington website, and we'll disseminate it amongst all our community partners. The SGV LGBTQ Center, Placentia Consulting will be in that list. So it also speaks to sort of websites. The Mapumaya Clinic, the Utopia is under the Utopia Washington, utopiawa.org. Yeah, Tepa. Okay.
Yes, utopiawa.org. So utopiawa.org. Yes.
Okay. And then Camila, what's the SGV Center's website?
sgvlgbtq.org.
You know? Um Hector, it's just Placencia Consulting. Is that the website we can get you on?
Yes.
Okay.
Future Placencia or Placencia Consulting.
Okay. And then Manmalo, the Pasifika Trans Men's
Yeah,
Network is
it's Pasifika Transmen Network at gmail.com. We're
okay.
working on our website.
Awesome. And then I think everyone has social media handles. Pride in the City also has a website. There's the LGBTQ Patient Care Fund that we use to sort of fund some of the initiatives to do outreach for our LGBT community at City of Hope. Um, and so thank you so much for your time. We're at the end of it. I appreciate everything you guys had to contribute. And we are so blessed that you guys gave us your wisdom, your time, and your talent today. And so with that, thanks everybody. We'll go off air. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Samuel.
Okay.
Yes.
You guys completely lost the assignment. Like, I think it took about 3 minutes before you guys went back. I think Nainoa left. So feel free to leave the studio. And then I look forward to working with everybody in the future. Yeah. All right, everybody.
All right, take
Bye. Good
care.
evening.
Bye.
Gracias.
Happy holidays.